Coming to you today as a TSA for Cisco Secure Workload. And what I want to do is touch on the importance of identity with regards to proper segmentation. I am a TSA covering Cisco Secure Workload, and a lot of my customers, when I present to them, are like, hey, this micro-segmentation is awesome, but how do we layer proper identity controls on top of that so we could do an identity-based micro-segmentation project? Well, what I'm going to show you today is a really elegant solution utilizing two very powerful Cisco technologies, both Duo and Cisco Secure Workload, to do just that, to create identity-based micro-segmentation. And I like to have a little bit of fun with these, so I actually used an AI app called Tome to help me generate this kind of very short bit of slideware where we can kind of explain our use case in a more fun way. So I'm doing a tale of three users, Tom, Dick, and Jane, which I love to play on names there because one of my favorite movies is Fun with Dick and Jane. But they're all trying to access our application using three different methods. And this is very, very common. So this, is their story. And I wanted to play the SBI music here, but I couldn't get it. So Tom is our first kind of subject. He is your typical, corporate America dude. He works off his corporate desktop PC that they sent to him. He works out of his home office in Butte, Montana, and he's a regular accountant. So he's an individual contributor within the accounting department. So in terms of our web invoicing application that he'll be using, he's your fairly stereotypical day-to-day user that's going to be logging on from a known device. You also have Dick, and Dick's our resident IT guy, right? He works off his personal laptop because he thinks Windows sucks. And he only works, typically wherever there's going to be free Wi-Fi is where you'll find him. And again, he hates Windows, which is why he's using Linux off his personal laptop. We want to be able to differentiate, right, a lot of the times between who can access, not only based on their identity, but what they're accessing on. And that's where Duo really comes into play here. Give us the ability to do very strong kind of AAA against both the user and the machine being used to log on with. And then there's Jane. Jane usually accesses this through her cell phone. She is a manager within the finance department. So she's in meetings all day. Typically it's going to be, somewhere from a meeting room or from her home office. But again, typically she's going to be accessing things through her cell phone, making sure invoices are getting paid and things of that nature. Our scenario is going to be pretty simple, right? We're going to have this invoicing application. I'm going to draw this out in a moment. That's going to be accessed through AWS. It's all hosted up in AWS. We want complete micro-segmentation. So as you're going to see, this application is actually comprised of 8 different servers, 8 different workloads. We want to be able to properly micro-segment them, meaning they only are having the communications allowed that they need in order to fulfill their kind of duty with regards to this app. We want the finance users that are within a specific group within Active Directory to be able to access that application over the web. Nobody else should be able to access that application. IT users should be able to SSH to the front end of that application. Again, I'm going to cover that in another video series because that's another kind of bag of worms that we can open up. And then all other users trying to access this web invoicing application should be denied access. So it's a fairly simplistic use case, but again, we're layering together two very powerful technologies within the Cisco architecture, Cisco, kind of umbrella of a platform, to comprise the entire solution. Now, what I want to show you is our reference architecture here, which a lot of us laugh at because it is, with all the acquisitions and things that a company of Cisco size does, this can get pretty vast. It's very easy to get overwhelmed looking at something like this. But what I like to do is come in and sort of highlight what we can show here. I don't know why that's showing a magnifying glass. But what I want to do is couple together some of these very powerful portions of Duo, which is going to be like your risk-based multi-factor authentication, passwordless, device trust, continuous trust, and then couple that together with some of the very strong components of Cisco Secure Workload, where we're doing micro or macro segmentation. We're able to provide cloud-native security, which we are going to be doing within the scope of this demo, along with other, visibility-based things like the telemetry aspect that Cisco Secure Workload, the former artist known as Titration, right, used to provide with regards to telemetry. So again, we're going to couple together these kind of disparate parts of this architecture within the Cisco Security Reference Architecture to provide what I think is a really elegant solution. Now, what I want to do really quick is step into whiteboarding our application. I want you guys to have a pretty good picture of what this looks like as we walk through it. So what we're going to do is draw this out. What we have is part of our architecture over here in AWS. The very first component that users are going to hit with regards to this application is a front-end load balancer. Again, it's your typical setup. This load balancer is going to be front-ending 3 smaller web servers where traffic will be load balanced across. So it could, balance to either 3 of these. Beyond them is another load balancer and then 3 database servers. So your typical traffic pattern with regards to this application is load balancer, web server, load balancer, and then one of the 3 databases. Fairly easy to microsegment. It looks very, very nice when we go through it. But the problem with this is we could restrict access from, say, the internet to this front-end load balancer by an IP address. But again, seeing those pictures of our users moving around, we can't always say with confidence where they're going to be accessing that from. So again, the ability to couple some sort of identity-based controls against who's accessing this application becomes very, very important, because as it sits right now, anybody could come in and access port 80 on that load balancer and at least hit the logon screen on one of these web servers, regardless if they could log in or not. So what we want to do is do something a little bit more elegant, right? And what I've done is I've stuck a Duo DNG, which is a dynamic network gateway, in front of this load balancer within AWS, and it communicates back to my Duo admin panel, which has an association to read from Azure Active Directory, which is where all my users are stored. So now what's going to happen through some DNS magic that goes on is that when users want to access this application, they're going to hit the DNG. They're going to authenticate through Azure Active Directory, and if they're allowed, they're going to be able to pass through to the load balancer. So now within the scope of our micro-segmentation solution, the front-end interface of the DNG is going to be allowed access to the application, and the DNG is going to be doing our user-based filtering. So what I'm going to show you is first our 8 different instances that you all saw. And if we look at this, we can see that I've got a dynamic network gateway installed here. I've got my 3 database servers front-ended by my database load balancer, my 3 application servers, which are my web servers, front-ended by my application load balancer. So what we're going to do is experiment a little bit. Right now, it's very easy, and in one of our core capabilities within Secure Workload, to microsegment. So, but again, this is going to be an agentless-based deployment. So we're able to discover policy. We're able to render, analyze that policy to our users within Cisco Secure Workload. So then you get something like this. It's very easy for us to go in, cluster, like nodes together within the scope of this application, provide a whitelist microsegmentation policy for our users. We can view it, in either way. We can view it like your traditional firewall list method here with our ports and protocols, or we can look at it through our graphical kind of, drawing kind of view, where we can see our different clusters here. We can click on the lines to see what ports and protocols are allowed. But what happens is, as we sit without a DNG in play, is we are basically allowing anybody access to these applications. So if I were to actually go, and again, I'm not using any form of authentication at all right now. If I were to take my app load balancer here and just, let's copy the private IP. I go to this, and we'll just hit that up. That's on port 80. We can see I can hit the front end. I can log into this guy, and we're in. Again, no user-based methods are being used to achieve this. Anyone on the internet's allowed access to port 80 on this guy. It's not the best solution, even if we're doing our identity-based controls at the login for our individual application. Again, without micro-segmentation in play, I could come in and actually hit the application servers on port 8081. Again, it's just not the best solution. So what we want to do is front end this app load balancer with the DNG, like you saw in my depiction earlier. So if I go through, let's go back to Cisco Secure Workload. Let's actually go to our application workspace where the DNG is included, which is our AWS SIWAP Duo. Let's take a look at these policies before we actually come up and apply them. So we've got our rules. I like to use the graphical view, what we call kind of the canvas view, where I still have the same, whitelist based policy for my application itself. But now instead of allowing just anybody into that application on port 80, I'm saying, hey, I'm only going to allow the Duo DNG AWS East to access port 80, I believe, on that application. And we're classifying this actually based on a tag coming in from AWS in this case, right? This could be Azure, this could be Google Cloud. So now instead of la-di-da-di everybody being able to hit the front end of this app load balancer, we're restricting it to the Duo DNG IP address that it's associated with. Again, that's dynamic because we're using a tag or a label coming in from AWS to identify this object. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this policy. Let's go ahead and hit enforce here. We'll do the latest version. We'll click next. Next. And we will let this apply. It'll take a couple minutes, so I will resume this video once it's done. Okay, it should be done. It's been a minute or two. So we'll look over at the enforcement status tab. We should see our 8 workloads. Again, these are agentless. So the agent isn't out there. We're doing all this through cloud native integrations. So we do see each of them has policy generated, the most efficient policy for those nodes themselves. So if we go back to AWS, let's refresh this. We can see now that we've got different entries for attached to the workloads within AWS. So if we just take a look at one of these, what we'll see is probably a slew of stuff, both inbound and outbound rules being provided. That may be a bad example. So here's some outbound rules. So we see different ports allowed out. Yeah, it's probably a bad example. But again, we have all of our entries now. So if I were to go back to my front end where we access the load balancer directly, I would anticipate now that this would fail because now the only thing allowed to communicate with the app load balancer is going to be the DNG that's sitting in AWS alongside it. Remember, what we want to do is still allow access, but only to users who are supposed to access that application. So I'm going to open up an incognito window. And what we'll do is we will go to my URL. So I actually own hikeronatrail.com. So I put in an entry for siwap.hikeronatrail.com. And if we browse to this, we now get, again, the Duo is going to redirect us to a login. So I've got 2 users. I've got, Russell Wilson and Tom Brady. So Russell Wilson is actually, I should have probably named him Tom, Dick, and Jane, right? Russell Wilson is actually in my group. So we'll do Russell Wilson at hikeronatrail.com. For all intents and purposes, Russell will be Tom, and Tom will not be Tom. And then we will put in his password. We will say no. So what it's going to do is it's going to redirect us as it should. Hey, send me a push. Let's not only validate your identity, but let's also make you log in. So on my phone, we do have a verify my identity. I will allow that. And we get the SIWAP, .highground@trail.com. So if we log in now, we should see, hey, we are able to come in. We're able to read invoices. We should be able to come in and, delete an invoice if we need to. Let's test that out just to make sure the database is working properly. So I'll click on that guy. We'll click delete. And we should get an OK message. And we do. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Let's take a look and see if we can log in with another user. So we will do SIWAP, highgroundtrail.com. And I'm not entirely certain. Let's see. We may have to register Tom. So if your users aren't registered, it's going to ask you to go ahead and register. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and say next here. My sign-ins. I have a different authenticator app. Next. And the registration, if you guys haven't seen this before, is pretty simple for Duo. They're just going to give you this code. I'm going to add a new account. I'm going to use a QR code. We will hold this up to the screen. Save it. And now my account's added. So now if I click next, enter the 6-digit code in the Authenticator app. So I will go ahead and fully register with this. But remember, Tom is not a member of my account. He's not a member of the finance group. So theoretically, Tom should be denied access to this application based on that membership. So as we can see, his account doesn't have access to the app. So we're not going to allow him to kind of pass through that invisible, identity-based barrier. Now, we're strictly doing this based on group membership at this point in time. But remember, with things like Duo, we can actually do it based on the device they're accessing it with. If they're accessing it with a phone versus a PC versus personal or corporate owned, we can make those delineations and really start to provide trusted access while having a fully fledged micro-segmented application on the back end. Again, this, from my standpoint, is a really elegant solution in terms of both micro-segmentation with an identity play at the same point. So again, just to reiterate, now we're only allowing the Duo DNG to access that because it does sort of a source NAT translation for us based on that user login to access the app load balancer, which in turn is going to allow us to access the rest of our application. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. LinkedIn, hit me up at jlund@cisco.com. Happy to talk with any of you all about this in the future. Thanks for watching.